the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of South Korea. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup to be played in 2024. This episode covers South Korea's players. We're doing this media cast in two parts. Part one is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player media casts we've done, so we're aiming for a lighter, more kind of narrative version this time. However, we did cover South Korea for the World Cup there back in 2022, and if you are interested in kind of a deeper dive into the history of the players, I think we did that there. This time we'll be focusing more on their recent participation. Part two of this media cast will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that will be in late December or early January. And at that time, we'll go back over the list that we compiled this time and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things like injuries, and we'll talk more on that at the end here. We've made a separate video on what we'll be covering over the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focused on the Asian and African Cups, both of those taking place in early 2024. And we have also started coverage of World Cup 2026 qualifying. So this episode will have three sections. Section one, where we give and discuss some general information on the team. In section two, the main part, we will look at the candidates in each position. The main candidates we'll focus on and try to determine how likely they are to make the final squad. And section three is just a short one at the end where we give any closing thoughts and we preview part two in more detail. Let's begin then. And we begin with some comments on the squad. So not a lot of observations for South Korea here. They played in the World Cup in 2022, and they have made a few changes, but on the whole, they're fairly minor changes. So it's a pretty stable squad and a stable formation for South Korea. Let's look at retirements, and well, we'll start by just saying the manager, Paulo Bento, has moved on, and we'll talk about that at the beginning of the candidate section and who's replaced him. We don't really have any retirement since the 2022 World Cup, since that was only a year ago. But for other teams, we are kind of doing retirement since the last Asian Cup. So that's what we'll do here. We begin with Lee Chung-yong, the left midfielder who played with the team from 2008 to 19 with 90 caps and 9 goals. And he was part of the World Cup squad in 2010 and all of their tournaments except the 2018 World Cup. He didn't make the final cup for that. And he was off the team before the World Cup in 2022, last appearing for the national team in March 2019. Lee Sung-yong, was at times a captain of the team. He played from 2008 to 2019 with 111 caps and 10 goals. He was a defensive midfielder, and people may remember him mostly from playing with Swansea in the English League, which he did for 6 years. Also part of the squad for the 2010 World Cup and tournaments onwards. He didn't miss any tournaments, so that's 2 World Cups and 3 Asian Cups, but off the team before the 2022 World Cup there, last playing in the 2019 Asian Cup. So Ki Sun Yong, a retiree. Gu Jia Chul, an attacking midfielder or forward, also was captain of the team for a time. He played from 2008 to 2019, so just like the other 2 we've just talked about. Gu Jia Chul had 78 caps and 20 goals, and was not part of the World Cup 2010 squad, but he was part of the tournaments after that. And he too last appeared for the national team in the 2019 Asian Cup. Ji Dong Wong was with the team from 2010 to 2019. He had 56 caps and 11 goals. He played for Mainz in Germany and Borussia Dortmund briefly in Germany, as well as for Sunderland in England. And he was part of the Asian Cup in 2011. That was his first tournament. Actually didn't participate in many tournaments beyond that. He was a sub in the 2014 World Cup and the 2019 Asian Cup, and he did play for a little while after that, but last appeared for the national team in March 2019. Next we have Yi Yong. Yi Yong was with the team from 2013 to 2022, so a bit more recent than the other ones. He finished his international career at least, with 57 caps and no goals, and was part of the World Cup squad in 2014 and every tournament up until the 2019 Asian Cup. But he last appeared for the team in June 2022, so about a half a year before the World Cup there. So Yi Yong kind of completes our list of retirements. Let's look at the club affiliations for South Korea. Only about half of the players play domestically now. They have quite a few players abroad, and some of them with world-class clubs. But let's look at their domestic league, which is quite strong in Asia. And the 3 clubs most of the players are coming from at this moment is Ulsan Hyundai and Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors there. And interestingly, the Kimcheon Sangmu. So Kimcheon Sangmu is the army team, and basically players are loaned to the Kimcheon Sangmu, or one of about 4 different teams, when they have to serve their military duty. And I think they also have a couple of weeks after their, I think it's 1.5 or 2 years of military service, but even after that they have to go back for a weekend or a week or something like that. And if you're a soccer player, you can join the soccer team of Kimcheon Sangmu, because they do play in the league. So they have a few players on loan there. And it seems like a lot of players are fulfilling their military service, because at this moment quite a few players are with that team. Outside of the country, inside the region, we have a few players playing in China, less than in the past. I think there's only 2 right now. There used to be more, but I think that's a facet of China's league getting weaker. And also in Japan, again, a bit less than they've had before, but that could be because there are more players playing outside or more players making it to Europe. We do have a few also playing in the Middle East. So in countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, some of the Korean players playing there. But we have a large number of players playing in Europe. And that was always a goal of the national team. It's a bit ironic that they have the manager that they have, because Jurgen Klinsmann, when he coached the USA team, was always urging players to get on teams with Europe. So he must be pretty happy with what South Korea is doing. And compared to the past, it's a pretty amazing thing. So a lot of people will think Tottenham is the biggest club that they play for. Well, their biggest player, Son Heung-min, does play for Tottenham, but it's not the biggest club on the list here, because we have one player with Bayern Munich and another with Paris Saint-Germain. So some really big clubs there. And beyond those three, some pretty respectable second-tier clubs. Stuttgart, Red Star Belgrade in Serbia, Wolverhampton and Celtic being represented. And then a whole list of smaller clubs, but respectable clubs nonetheless. So doing very well in their club affiliations. Let's move on to recent games, and we're going to do it a little differently for South Korea because they were in the World Cup in 2022, so that's a bit of a reset. For other teams, we're looking from the beginning of 2022 or over the past 2 years. And in fact, when we look at the players, we will be looking at that 2-year stretch. But here, we'll just look at how they fared from the World Cup onwards. So World Cup 2022, they had 4 games there in December of 2022. That was Uruguay, Ghana, Portugal, and Brazil. And after that, it was friendlies. They have been busy with friendlies, with 2 of them in March. That was Colombia and Uruguay. And 2 of them in June. That was Peru and El Salvador. And I'll say they did a bit of experimentation in those 2 games, beginning with Peru. September, they had 2 games. That was Wales and Saudi Arabia. And in October, they had 2 friendlies also with Tunisia and Vietnam. And we're not particularly interested in the results of those games. We're more interested actually in the formations that they used during those games. So let's move on to that section. In the World Cup, they started with a 4-2-3-1 for the first 2 games and went with a 4-3-3 in game 3 against Portugal and switched it up again to a 4-4-2 against Brazil. So the consistent thing there is 4 defenders at the back, so 2 central defenders and a right and left wing, right and left back. And we're going to see that that continued, even though the formations that they used in the Cup did not continue. Basically, after the World Cup, they used a 4-4-2 in 7 of those 8 games. And just against Tunisia in October, a 4-1-4-1. So just to summarize that, that's a 4-4-2 6 times, a 4-2-3-1 twice, a 4-3-3 twice, no, a 4-3-3 just 1 time, and a 4-1-4-1 1 time. So you can see, I'm sorry, I have to change that to 8 times for the 4-4-2. I think I made a mistake there. And as we said, their recent formation is very much a 4-4-2 without much deviation. So as we go through the team, maybe keep that image in mind. 4 at the back, usually 4 midfielders, so 2 central midfielders and 2 wingers, and 2 forwards up at the front. With some minor deviation in there, especially in the World Cup games. Okay, we'll finish this section by looking at their upcoming games. So World Cup qualification, World Cup 2026 qualification began for South Korea in November. It began for the region actually in October with a preliminary round. And they start by playing one of those teams in the preliminary round. That is Singapore at home. So Singapore fairly easily beat out Guam in the preliminary round to make it to this, the second round of qualifying. And in the so that one is on November 15th. And then in the second game, they played China away. So it's Singapore at home and China away. Now, they could probably afford to be a bit experimental in the home game against Singapore, but in the away game against China, we think that they'd be using their best players. So that may be a good glimpse at the squad that they'll start with at the Asian Cup. Teams usually schedule a couple of pre-tournament friendlies. However, South Korea have none scheduled yet, but we do think that they will schedule one or two, and maybe we can update that in part 2 of the podcast or the mediacast. Okay, let's move on to part 2 or section 2, where we look at the candidates, and we start with the manager there. So I've alluded a couple of times to the managers, so let's clarify it here. We have Paulo Bento, who is the outgoing manager, so he led them through the World Cup there. And I think he wasn't fired. I think his contract expired. He has moved on to become manager of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So they may be meeting him. They may be meeting him in this tournament. He left after the World Cup, and they have brought in Jurgen Klinsmann as their new manager. So let me tell you a bit about Jurgen Klinsmann, a very successful player. And for the national team, that was between 1987 and 1998, where he earned 108 caps and 47 goals. And he, well, I won't go into too much detail. He was in the World Cup 1994 was probably his biggest tournament there. And let's talk about him as a manager, though. South Korea then since 2013, and he was also manager of the USA national team from 2011 to 2016, and also from the German national team from 2004 to 2006. So he led Germany through the 2006 World Cup. USA, it was just the 2013 Gold Cup. No, I thought I was wrong there. 2013 and 2015 Gold Cups and the 2014 World Cup. And also the 2016 Copa Centenario, a kind of a tournament that was played between South and North American teams, South, North, and Central America, which they're doing again in 2024. So I'm looking forward to that tournament. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Jurgen Klinsmann, the manager of South Korea. I don't know what dragged me off topic there. Okay, let's go to start to look at the players. So we will just name the players at first, and I'll make a couple of comments right away here. So if you see, if you're watching the YouTube version and you see the name in black, like Kim Sung-gyu here, that means he has been involved in a tournament. I'll just put one of the possible candidates here for comparison. Kim Jun-hong has not been through a tournament. That's why his name is in gray. Another thing to mention is a spelling convention. So actually, what websites use for spelling conventions is truly horrible. I've lived in Korea, so I'm familiar with it, and what I find is that the way names are spelled is so horrible that people can't pronounce the names properly. So I basically have my own spelling convention, and I'm not trying to popularize it, but if you read the name, you'll get pretty close to what it sounds like in Korean. So Kim Sung-gyu is the definite candidate for a goalkeeper. We have Jo Hyun-woo as a definite candidate also. Song Bum-gun as a possible candidate, and also a possible candidate, Kim Jun-hong. So let's take a look at these players. Kim Sung-gyu is a veteran with the team since 2013. He has 67 caps and has been with the team in tournaments since the 2014 World Cup. He wasn't the starter until the 2019 Asian Cup, but he has started there and in the recent World Cup too. So over the past 2 years, he started 21 of their 28 games, and he's been on the bench for 4 of those and not selected for 4 others. 3 of those were in the East Asian Football Federation Cup. That was in the summer of 2021, and South Korea tended to bring their local players to that tournament, but the players playing abroad, they didn't. So he's in Saudi Arabia right now, so with Al-Shabaab, and was not a part of that tournament. So looks like the starting keeper, Kim Sung-gyu, but he only did start 3/4 of the games. Our next candidate, also definite, is Jo Hyun-woo, and he started 6 of their 28 games over the past 2 years, but he was on the bench for 20, and the only 2 matches that he missed were injuries. So Jo Hyun-woo, a definite candidate also. Song Bum-gun has been with the team. He's our first possible candidate, by the way. Been with the team since 2022. Only 1 cap in that time. But he has been on the bench for 19 of the games, and he was injured for 4 and not selected for 4 others. However, his injury is for the September and October games recently. We're doing this at the end of October, by the way. So he is an injury doubt for this tournament, Song Bum-gun, and we'll have to update this in part 2. It's a broken foot, so that sounds like a bit of a longer term injury. So the next candidate, Kim Jun-hong, seems to have come in to replace him. He doesn't have any caps for the national team, and he came in September of this year, so didn't start any of the games, any of the 4 games, but was on the bench for all of them. So obviously replacing Song Bum-gun. All right, those are all the candidates. So it's pretty straightforward here as we enter our summary narrative. It's Kim Sung-gyu, was the starting keeper in the World Cup and has played 3/4 of the game, so we think he's going to be the starter. Jo Hyun-woo is almost certainly the backup there. And the 3rd string keeper looked like it would definitely be Song Bum-gun. In fact, was the only viable candidate until his injury, and then Kim Jun-hong was brought in. So it all seems to come down the 3rd string position to whether Song Bum-gun recovers from that broken foot. So fairly straightforward for the goalkeepers. Let's move on to defenders, and we begin with central defenders, and a definite candidate in Kim Min-jae, and a likely candidate in Jung Sung-hyun. Sorry, that's likely. Also likely is Kim Young-kwon. And possible candidates, we have 4 possible candidates here. So Park Ji-soo is the first, Kim Ju-sung, Jo Min, and Kwon Kyung-won. And we do have 1 candidate at the possible but unlikely level. I'm not going to post his name because I don't think he's really a consideration, but it's kind of interesting though. It's Kim Ji-soo, and Kim Ji-soo is currently with Brentford in England since the beginning of, or since sometime this year, 2023. He's just 19 years old, so perhaps a bit too young for this tournament. He did actually appear on the bench for 2 games in September 2023. Actually, that's quite recent, so I think I will put him on the list, but he wasn't called up in October, so as I say, perhaps a bit too young for this tournament, especially considering how many candidates they have. So let's go through those candidates. And Kim Min-jae, the definite candidate, considered one of the best central defenders in the world, and has recently moved to Bayern Munich in Germany. So it looks like there's some agreement there that he is one of the best. So Kim Min-jae was a starter in the World Cup. He was struggling with injury there, so he missed game 3 with a calf injury. Over the past 2 years, he has started 15 of their 28 games, on the bench for 1, injured for 4, and he was doing military service for 2 of those games, just 2 of them. So it looks like he was just doing the kind of afters there, not his main military service, and not selected for 6 others. So Kim Min-jae, a definite candidate and a starter if he's healthy. There's no question of his health at this time. But okay, let's move on to Jung Seung-hyun. And he's a likely candidate. He's been with the team since 2017, but just 10 caps in that time. And that's kind of reflected in his tournament experience. He was at the World Cup in 2018 and the Asian Cup in 2019, but he didn't get on the field in either game. And then not selected for the World Cup in 2022. However, he returned after a 12-month absence in June of 2023 and started all 6 of their remaining games. So Jung Seung-hyun seems to be back in the thick of the team here, and we consider him a likely candidate. Kim Young-kwon, also a likely candidate. He's a veteran with the team since 2010 with 103 caps and 7 goals. He's 32 years old. And yes, part of every tournament since the World Cup in 2014. Over the past 2 years, Kim Young-kwon has started 16 of their 28 games. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 6. And he was injured for 2 and not selected for just 3 matches there. However, for the last 4 games, he's been on the bench. So it may be that he's losing his starting position, but we still think he's a likely candidate to make the squad. That is Kim Young-kwon. Now we have 4 possible candidates to deal with. The first one is Park Ji-soo. So he has been with the team since 2019, but not a part of any tournament. Over the past 2 years, he started 7 of their 28 games, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2, and injured for 2, and not selected for 15 matches, including the last 4 matches. So he's called up fairly smatteringly, Park Ji-soo, and not selected for the last 4. So we have him as a possible candidate, but yeah, not looking promising for him. Next we have Kim Joo-sung, and he has been with the team since 2022. He got his first appearance in July of that year, possibly during the EAFF Cup there. He didn't start any of their remaining 18 games, but he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 7, not selected for 9 matches. However, he was selected for the last 6 matches and subbed in for the last one. So his recent participation makes him look more promising. And in fact, I'm going to move him up on the list there ahead of Park Ji-soo. So that's Kim Joo-sung. If he does make it to the team, it would probably be as a substitute. Okay, next we have Jo Yoo-min. Jo Yoo-min was selected for the World Cup in 2022. He got his first appearance on the bench in June of 2022, and he started 2 of their remaining 22 games. I was reluctant to say it because there's so many 22s in here. He started 2 of their remaining 22 games, was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 11. And so he missed 6 matches, 2 of them through injury and 4 of them by non-selection. However, those were also the last 4 matches. So looks like some changes going on at the end here for South Korea. So he always got called up until he got injured in June of 2023 games, and then hasn't been selected since then. So Jo Yoo-min, possible, but his recent participation is not promising either. Finally, we have Kwon Kyung-young as a possible candidate. Kwon Kyung-young plays for Gamba Osaka in Japan. There, and he has been with the team since 2017 with 30 caps and 2 goals. So part of the squad in 2019 Asian Cup and 2022 World Cup, but only saw a little bit of game time in the World Cup there, subbed into game 2 right at the end. So more of a sub. Over the past 2 years, he started 8 of their 28 games and subbed in for 4 and was on the bench for 9 and not selected for 7 others. But he too has not been selected for the last 6 matches. So we have 3 of these possible players kind of dropping off the radar in recent times, and one of them, Kim Joo-sung, coming in. So that is kind of interesting. And really, though, that discussion is more in terms of bench players rather than starters. So let's summarize the position of central defender. And it was Kim Min-jae and Kim Young-kwon in the Cup, and for a short time after the Cup. They tried a new pairing in their 3rd friendly. That's the June game against Peru, where we actually saw a lot of experimentation. A new pairing in that game with Jung Seung-hyun and Park Ji-soo pairing up there. So Jung Seung-hyun, a likely candidate, and Park Ji-soo, a possible candidate. Kim Min-jae returned to the position, but Kim Young-kwon didn't, and now seems to have been replaced as the starter by Jung Seung-hyun. So I'm thinking that that's the starting pairing, Kim Min-jae and Jung Seung-hyun, taking over the position really from Kim Young-kwon in recent times. Okay, let's move on to the left back position. And we start with a likely candidate in Kim Jin-soo. And another likely candidate, Lee Ki-jae. And a possible candidate, Park Yu-hyun. And a couple of possible but unlikely players, but we're going to post them both. Gang Sang-woo. We're posting him because he has participated recently. And Hong Chul, we're posting him since he was part of the World Cup 2022 squad. But we'll deal with him right now because he has not been selected in 2023. So since the World Cup, he hasn't been called up, Hong Chul. And our other possible but unlikely candidate returned after a 19-month absence in September 2023. And was subbed in for 1 game and on the bench for 1 game, and then not selected for the October matches. So an outside chance there for Gang Sang-woo, but you know, given that there are 3 players ahead of him, and they'll probably, or 4 players, no, 3, and they'll probably only bring 2. Makes it unlikely. So let's go back and look at the 3 main candidates. Then Kim Jin-soo. A bit of a veteran from 2013 with 71 caps and 2 goals. And his first tournament was the Asian Cup in 2015. He didn't make the World Cup in 2014 due to injury. and also true of the 2018 World Cup, but he's been part of the tournament since, a starter in the 2022 World Cup. And since then, or over the past 2 years, Kim Jin-soo has started 16 of their 28 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4, and out with 2 separate injuries for 2 games and not selected for 4 matches. So he's usually called up. However, in terms of a starter, he was benched. He was on the bench for the last 2 matches, which may mean that his starting position is under threat. But Kim Jin-soo, we consider him a likely candidate to make it to the squad. Next, Lee Ki-jae, also a likely candidate, and he returned after a 2.5-year absence in March of 2023 and started 7 of their 8 remaining games and was on the bench for 1 other. So I think he's sometimes playing out of position, but nevertheless starting a lot recently. So Lee Ki-jae, who's been with the team, by the way, since 2021 and wasn't selected for the World Cup squad, but seems to be making inroads here. Okay, Park Kyu-hyun is the possible candidate, and he's new to the team and actually not likely to make it. The reason we are putting him as a possible candidate is more because of his club affiliation. So in terms of participation, he got 2 substitute appearances in June 2023, but then was not recalled in September or October. So that would be possible, but unlikely. However, he does play for Dynamo Dresden in Germany and was with Werder Bremen in Germany from 2019 to 23. So we think that club affiliation perhaps makes him a bit more likely. So we have him at the possible level. Okay, that's the candidates for left back. So let's finish with the narrative. It was Kim Jin-soo throughout the World Cup and for the first game after. Lee Ki-jae came in during the second friendly in March of 2023 and has started 6 of the 7 games since. So I was mistaken. He's not playing out of position. He's playing as the left back. Kim Jin-soo just came back in for 1 of those games, so started only 1 of the last 7 games, and I think subbed in for a couple. So it looks like Lee Ki-jae is making a bid for being the starting left back, but we think Kim Jin-soo and Lee Ki-jae are likely candidates to reach the cup, to make the final squad there. Over on the right side, we have a likely candidate in Sol Young-woo and a possible candidate in Kim Moon-hwan. Actually, 3 possible candidates. The second one is Kim Tae-hwan, and the third one is An Hyun-bom, who actually is coded as a left midfielder, but the only game he has played was a start on the right side. So we've moved him here for this discussion. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate, and we will put his name on the list, Yoon Jong-gyu. And we're putting his name on the list because he was on the roster for the World Cup in 2022. Actually, he was selected regularly in the back half of 2022 before the World Cup, but has not been selected after that. So possible but unlikely Yoon Jong-gyu, and we won't give more detail on him unless he's recalled to the squad on the final selection. So let's look at the more likely candidates. Sol Young-woo, he is likely, and he got his first appearance on the bench in March 2023 and started 5 of their remaining 7 games to October, or to now, and was on the bench for 2 others. So coming in June, but really inserting himself into the lineup. He too is coded as a left back, but in fact he seems to have become the starting right back. That is Sol Young-woo. The next candidate is just at the possible level. It's Kim Moon Hwan, and he's been on the team since 2018 and has 22 caps. 26 caps. Part of the Asian Cup in 2019, but just a sub there. However, he was a starter in the 2022 World Cup, starting all 4 games. So since the start of 2022, he actually was off the team for the first part of that year, but returned in June 2022 to start 9 of their 22 games. And he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3. However, he was not selected for 7 matches. And here we have another player who was fairly regularly selected and then suddenly not selected for the last 6 matches. So we've seen this on other teams too. It's not quite as much with South Korea, but it's a bit more actually as I'm going through it here. It's happening a bit more than I thought. So Kim Moon Hwan's status kind of up in the air here. We'll talk about it in the summary a little bit more. Next we have Kim Tae-hwan. Kim Tae-hwan has been with the team since 2014, 23 caps in that time. That's not a lot, and it's obvious in his tournament participation because he wasn't part of any of the tournaments from 2014 onwards, except finally in the World Cup 2022, he was finally selected, even if he didn't see any action in that tournament. So over the past 2 years, he started 7 of their 28 games, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 10, and not selected for 8 other matches. So almost considering Kim Tae-hwan a likely candidate, but he's kind of also drifted off the team a little bit. Over the last 6 matches, he was not selected for 4 of them, but then he came back in October to sub in once and appear on the bench once. So actually, I would put him above Kim Moon Hwan on that basis. It's just that Kim Moon Hwan was a starter in the World Cup, so I'm reluctant to move him down. Finally, the last possible candidate here is An Hyun Bum. So he is new to the team. He got his first cap in June of 2023. He started 1 of the remaining 6 games. That was the first one of those. And then he was injured for 1 and on the bench for 2 and not selected for the last 2 matches. So came in June of 2023, saw a little action and then drifted off the team, basically. And as we said, his only start it was as a right back, even though he's coded as a left back. So let's take a look at the summary and story of this position, right back position. So as we saw, it was Kim Moon Hwan throughout the World Cup. However, he hasn't started since then. So they seem to be searching for a starter, with Kim Tae-hwan getting 2 starts and then An Hyun Bum starting 1. However, they seem to find the new starter in newcomer Sol Young-woo. Even though he's coded as a left back, he now seems to hold the starting position. So Sol Young-woo, we think likely to make it to the cup, and then it's a bit of a toss-up between Kim Moon Hwan and Kim Tae-hwan. Probably, and An Hyun Bum just with an outside chance there. Okay, let's move on to midfield, and we will look at defensive midfielders first. We usually look at the defensive midfielders and central midfielders together before doing the summary, since the positions overlap a lot. So we have a likely candidate in Hwan In Bum, and another in Park Young-woo, and a possible candidate in Jung Woo-young. He's one of 2 players who are called Jung Woo-young. We'll meet the other one further upfield. And then we do have a possible but unlikely candidate, but we're not going to mention him because it seems too unlikely. So let's look at these 3 players. Hwan In-bum. He's been with the team since 2018 and has 48 caps and 5 goals. He's the player who plays for Red Star Belgrade in Serbia. Actually, a pretty good resume here. He was also with Olympiacos in Greece and Rubin Kazan in Russia. And he's been part of tournaments since the Asian Cup in 2019. He was a starter in the World Cup 2022. Over the past 2 years, Hwang In-bum has started 19 of their 28 games. He was on the bench for 2, injured for 2, and not selected for 6. So we have him as a likely candidate here. And a bit of a concern in terms of him being a starter because he was on the bench for the last 2 games. Hwang In-bum. Okay, the next is Park Young-woo, and he's new to the squad. He got his first cap in June of 2023 and started 5 of their remaining 6 games and subbed in for 1 other. So it looks like he's making a bid at a starting position. I see he was with Konkuk University. That's a university that I taught at in Korea. Okay, that's off topic, but just a point of interest. He's playing in the UAE now, Park Young-woo. So a new player, but started the last 5 games and subbed into the 1 other. And basically, he's replacing Jung Woo-young, who's a veteran with the team, but hasn't been selected for the last 6 games. So Jung Woo-young since 2015, with 73 caps, but he, is 34 years old. So a lot of tournament history. He was a starter in the 2022 World Cup. Over the past 2 years, Jung Woo-young started 14 of their 28 games, so half of the games. He was subbed in for 1 and not selected for 13. So basically started half and not selected for half. And that includes the last 6 matches. So seems to be making his way out. But we're a little reluctant to say that he's possible. He and players like him are possible but unlikely because we see this pattern so much. So we're not sure. Are they just trying out new players and maybe building up the bench by giving these new players game time? Or are these players like Jung Woo-young really making their way off the team? Sometimes it seems alarming that a regularly selected player was suddenly dumped. So we're not 100% sure that's the case. So that's why we have Jung Woo-young as a possible candidate. So 3 defensive midfielders there, but we won't summarize the position until going through the central midfielders. And here we only have candidates at the possible level, 3 of them. So the first one is Hong Hyun-suk, and the next one Baek Sung-ho, and the last one Lee Soo-min, sorry. Let's take a look at these candidates then. Hong Hyun-suk got his first cap in June of 2023 and started 2 of their remaining 6 games. He also subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 1. And then there was 1 match that he wasn't selected for. So Hong Hyun-suk, new since June. And his start was in the second last game. That was the 4-1-4-1 formation where they used a 3-man midfield. So basically 1 extra central midfielder, and he filled that spot. The next one is Baek Sung-ho, and another player who was a regular until he wasn't selected for the last 6 games, just like Jung Woo-young before. Baek Sung-ho was part of the World Cup 2022 squad. He was subbed in 1 time. Interestingly, he was with the Barcelona youth club in Spain from 2010 to 2015 and played for much smaller teams in Spain, but is now back in Korea. Baek Sung-ho started 8 of their 28 games. He subbed in for 3 and was on the bench for 9. However, he was not selected for 6 matches, and those are the last 6 matches. So again, does it mean he's been unceremoniously dumped from the team, or does it mean they're just trying out other players? We don't know. So it'll be interesting in November when we see if some of these players come back into the squad. Last possible candidate, Lee Soo-min. Lee Soo-min is recently got his first cap in September 2023. So didn't start any of the remaining 4 games, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1 other. So there we have a new candidate coming in. Basically, Hong Hyun-suk and Lee Soo-min, new players coming in at the expense of the more experienced Baek Seung-ho, as far as that goes. So now we can kind of summarize both defensive and central midfielder position. So usually the formation calls for 2 players, the 4-4-2, if you think about it. In the cup, those 2 players were Hwang Eun-bum and Jung Woo-young. And that pairing remained there for the March 2023 games. But as we saw, the biggest changes were made when they played Peru in June, and new players replaced Jung Woo-young, and he has not come back. So mainly it was Park Young-woo who took over Jung Woo-young's spot in the last 2 games. Hwang Eun-bum remained until the last game, and there he was replaced not by any of the players we've talked about here, but by the right midfield Lee Jae-sung. So it looks like Hwang Eun-bum just missing. He was on the bench for the last 2 games there, where he was replaced. But Jung Woo-young does seem to be kind of out of the squad, although they don't seem to have decided on the replacing players. So they've been kind of trying a few players, even out of position players there. Okay, the position of left midfield and right midfield, really that only exists in the 4-3-3 formation. So we saw that in 1 game of the cup, but otherwise in the 4-4-2 formation, we're looking at kind of left wingers. So the one time they did use it, it was central midfielder Lee Kang-in, who played as the left midfielder there. Okay, and we do have 1 player actually coded as a left midfielder, but he's at the possible but unlikely level. And we will put his name on the list because he was part of the World Cup squad. However, he, like a few others we've met, was not selected for the last 6 games, and he was on the bench for 6 games before that. So Song Min-yu seems to be making his way off the team there, despite being a starter in the World Cup. Oh, sorry, despite being selected for the World Cup, he was on the bench there. And on the right midfield position, we don't have any candidates. And once again, that position was only used once. And it was a defensive midfielder who we just met, Hwang Eun-bum, playing that position there. So a central midfielder filling the role. But in the 4-4-2, it's usually left wingers who are playing, and that's what we're moving on to here. So we begin with Lee Jae-sung, who we did see coming back into the central midfield once or twice. He is a definite candidate, Lee Jae-sung. And we have Hwang Hee-chan. He's actually coded as an attacking midfielder primarily, but we're putting him here because he has been playing primarily on the left. Hwang Hee-chan, a definite candidate. We have Moon Sun-min as a possible candidate, and those are the 3 players we'll look at for this position. So Lee Jae-sung is coded as a right winger, but played more on the left. If the truth be known, he and the other right winger that we'll look at, kind of switched sides quite a bit. We'll get to the other one later, and we will talk about this as we go. So EJ Sung, coded as a right winger, but playing on the left, and actually is a bit more versatile than that. As well as playing as a left winger and right winger, he's played as a right forward as well, and as a central midfielder once too. EJ Sung is a very experienced player since 2015 with Korea, and 76 caps and 9 goals, and he plays with Mainz in Germany. And he was a starter in the 2018 World Cup and all tournaments since then. Over the past 2 years, he started 16 of their 28 games, and was on the bench for 2, injured for 4, and not selected for 6. Even that's a bit of a surprise to me. But anyway, we still consider him a definite candidate to make the squad. Next, we have Hwang Hee-chan, and he is playing for Wolverhampton in England. He was with Leipzig in Germany before that, and he started 12 of their 28 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. And injured for 4. He also was doing military service for 2 of their games and not selected for 5 others. So Hwang Hee-chan, been with the team since 2016, and in terms of tournaments, since the 2018 World Cup, but not definitely a starter. He only starts about half of the games, and once again, even though he's coded as an attacking midfielder primarily, we've moved him to the left wing for this discussion because that's where he's been playing. The one player coded as a left winger is our possible candidate Moon Sun-min. So he has been with the team since 2018. He did make the World Cup in 2018 squad, but not the 2019 Asian Cup or the recent World Cup. In fact, he had been off the team for quite a while. He returned after a 3.5-year absence in June of 2023 and didn't start any games, but was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4. So after an absence, he has been called up for the last 6 games. So we have Moon Sun-min as a possible candidate. So let's examine the position. A bit of movement around up at the front for South Korea. The role is usually a left winger in the 4-4-2 formation that they usually use, or else a left attacking midfielder if it's a 4-2-3-1. And they haven't used that much recently, but they do. South Korea does commonly use it. In the Cup, it was attacking midfielders playing the role, whether it was a left winger or a left attacking midfielder. It was Son Heung-min, who we will meet soon, playing as a left attacking midfielder or a left forward. And then in the final game, the 4-4-2 against Brazil, it was Hwang Hee-chan as a left winger. A few players were tried out since, but in the end, they seemed to land on EJ Sung, even though he's a right winger, at least for a few games, but towards the end, they returned to Hwang Hee-chan. That was for the last 3 games. So those 2 players, that's why we have them here. EJ Sung, Hwang Hee-chan, the main candidates for this upper left quadrant of the field. Let's move over to that right quadrant of the field. And here we have Lee Gang-in, who is actually coded as an attacking midfielder. Lee Gang-in, a likely candidate. And then Na Sang-ho, a possible candidate. He is coded as a left winger. So as you see, players kind of moving around a bit. Lee Gang-in has been with the team since 2019. He has 17 caps and 4 goals, and his first tournament was the World Cup, where he was selected, but a substitute, subbed into 3 of the games there. Prior to that, he had actually been off the team for 20 months, and he returned shortly before the World Cup in September of 2022 and started 6 of their remaining 15 games up until this point. He subbed in for 4, was on the bench for 2, injured for 2, and then just 1 game that he was not selected for over the past 2 years. So Lee Kang-in, a likely candidate to make the Cup. And he is the player that was surprisingly selected for Paris Saint-Germain in France, one of the biggest teams in the world. It did come as a surprise because he really, as we saw, was just a substitute in the World Cup there, and he had been playing for Mallorca in Spain, and prior to that, Valencia in Spain. And those are respectable clubs, but nobody really saw that he was kind of a top caliber player, I gotta say. Anyway, he has been increasingly starting after his move to Paris Saint-Germain, and even though he's an attacking midfielder or coded that way, he has predominantly played as a right winger during this period. Lee Kang-in, Na Sang-ho, a possible candidate, has been with the team since 2018, but was injured for the Asian Cup, even though he was selected to the final squad. So his first tournament was the 2022 World Cup, where he was a starter in Game 1, but lost his starting position. In terms of the last 2 years, he had returned after an 8-month absence in June of 2022 and started 5 of the remaining 22 games, as well as subbing in for 7 and on the bench for 6. And there were only 4 matches that he wasn't selected for. However, those have been the last 4 matches in September and October here. So he was a regular until not being called up for the last 4. Again, a bit baffling. And coded as a left winger, but playing as a right winger for the time being. So let's take a look at the position. Na Sang-ho, as we saw, started in the Cup, but it was someone else for Game 2, and then Lee Jae-sung, who we met before, for the last 2 games. The someone else that I mentioned in Game 2 of the World Cup was Lee Kang-in, who ended up playing the position predominantly after the Cup. So, but he hasn't been holding down that position solely. Some of the players that we mentioned as left wingers, Lee Jae-sung, Han Hee-chan, have all been used here. So the position kind of seems a bit unsettled, which is perhaps why we have out of position players playing it. Okay, we move on to the forward line, and we include attacking midfielders and secondary strikers in the forward line. And actually, we're going to do those 2 together because we don't really have a lot of strong candidates coded as attacking midfielders. Or we do have a couple, but we move them to other positions. So here we have a possible candidate, attacking midfielder Kwon Chang-hoon. And then one possible but unlikely candidate who I'll deal with. No, I'm just going to mention his name, Lee Dong-kyung. He made a brief return after an 18-month absence in September, so that was fairly recent, but was not called up after that. So again, we'll add him to the list and maybe talk more about him if he makes it to the final squad. And we'll just throw in the secondary striker here. That is the second player named Jung Woo-young. It's kind of funny because English websites try to differentiate them by spelling the defensive midfielder Jung, J-U-N-G, and they spell the secondary striker's name Jeong, but in fact in Korean it's just the same name, Jung Woo-young. So let's go back and take a look at our 2 possible candidates. First, the attacking midfielder Kwon Chang-hoon has been with the team since 2015 with 41 caps and 12 goals. But even though he was with the team since 2015, his first tournament was the World Cup in 2022. Actually, he was a consideration for the World Cup in 2018. He made the preliminary squad, but he was injured. An Achilles tendon injury prevented him from playing in that tournament. In the 2022 World Cup, he was a substitute and just appeared in one game there. Over the past 2 years, Guan Chang-hoon has started 12 of their 28 games, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 7. So here we have another regular candidate who was called up regularly, but then not selected for the last 6 matches. So again, yes, a bit of a mystery as to whether he has been dumped from the team or whether he has a chance of coming back there, Kwon Chang-hoon. And we covered Lee Dong-kyung, the possible but unlikely candidate. So let's take a look at Jung Woo-young, the secondary striker. He plays for Stuttgart in Germany. That's a recent move from Freiburg in Germany, and also has been associated with Bayern Munich himself, more with their Bayern Munich 2 team as well as their youth club. Jung Woo-young was with the Korean national team since 2021, so he was selected for the World Cup in 2022. But again, he too only appeared in one game there. He was a substitute. Over the last 2 years, he only started 5 of their 28 games, but he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 5. And the long and short of it was he wasn't selected for about 9 other games there. So kind of on and off the team there. But 2 of the games he subbed in for were the last 2 games. So that's kind of a good sign for him. But we have Jung Woo-young as a possible candidate. Let's summarize the position of attacking midfielder. So if you envision the 4-4-2 formation, it's not really a part of that formation. It is, though, when they play the 4-2-3-1, which we saw in the first 2 games of the Cup, and which I think South Korea might use more than they have been using recently. Anyway, when there is a central attacking midfielder, it's been right winger Lee Jae-sung, so we saw that he's quite versatile, or else the secondary striker here, Jung Woo-young, playing in the role. And yes, part of the reason we've moved some of the attacking midfielders out of this discussion is because they've been playing in different positions recently. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any starters there. Let's move on to the forward line, where we have a definite starter in Son Heung-min. So he's also coded as an attacking midfielder, but has been playing as a forward much more recently. So Son Heung-min, a definite candidate. Also Jo Gyu-sung, definite candidate, and a third one in Hwang Ui-jo. Hwang Ui-jo, a definite candidate also. And the fourth player we have here is at the likely level. That's Oh Hyun-gyu. So we have 4 players who we think are going to make the squad. So Son Heung-min is probably their most famous player. Here, he's the captain of the team, and he's been with Korea since 2010 with 117 caps and 39 goals. So he's well known as playing for Tottenham in England, and he was with Bayer Leverkusen and Hamburg in Germany before that. And he's been part of the squad since the Asian Cup in 2011. He was just a sub in that cup, but has been a starter in all of the tournaments ever since, and is probably their most important player. Over the past 2 years, Son Heung-min has started 19 of their 28 games, so about 2/3 of them. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2, and he was out with 2 separate injuries for 5 games. And the only games he wasn't selected for was the East Asian Cup in the summer of 2021. So a definite candidate to make the Cup. If you remember, just before the World Cup, he got an elbow to the face, so was playing in a face mask. So said he really wasn't at his best because of that. Okay, let's move on to the next definite candidate, Jo Gyu-sung. So he's fairly new to the team since 2021, but he has 29 caps and 8 goals. And he made a recent move to Midtjylland in Denmark. He was playing in South Korea before that, but in 2023 made that move to Denmark. He was also part of the 2022 World Cup squad. He subbed into game 1 and then gained a starting position after that. And he, over the past 2 years, started 16 of their 28 games 16 of their 28 games, as well as subbing into 8 and on the bench for 4. So he only missed 3 matches, and those were due to an injury and coronavirus. So he is always selected Jo Gyu-sung, and he's really the main forward of the forwards. If they have one forward, it's probably him. And Son Heung-min just accompanying him in the new formation as a second forward, but we do see Son Heung-min as a left attacking midfielder sometimes too. So Jo Gyu-sung, I would say, the starting forward for South Korea. We have Hwang Ui-jo also. He was a starting forward in the World Cup, but he lost his starting position after game 1. And Hwang Ui-jo has been with the team since 2015, 61 caps and 16 goals. And he's currently with Nottingham Forest in England since 2022, although he doesn't get on the field much. In fact, he's been loaned several times and is currently on loan to Norwich in England. But he's played for Bordeaux in France and Olympiacos in Greece. So I think does better at the club level, honestly, than he does for his international team. So Hwang Ui-jo has started 10 of their 28 games over the past 2 years, as well as subbing in for 10 and on the bench for 2. And he was not selected for 6 matches, but 3 of those were the East Asian Cup there. So he is usually selected, although especially in recent times, Hwang Ui-jo has been a substitute. And the final candidate at the likely level is Oh Hyung-gyu. He's been with the team since 2022 and has 7 caps. He's just 22 years old. He got his first cap in November 2022, so just before the World Cup there, but he wasn't part of the World Cup squad. He started 1 of their remaining 13 games after that, but he subbed in for 5 and was on the bench for 3. And in fact, the only games that he wasn't selected for were the World Cup matches. So he plays for Celtic in Scotland. So it looks like he's kind of making inroads into the team, especially after the World Cup, but as a substitute. Oh Hyung-gyu. So let's finish by just summarizing the position of forward. As we mentioned, it was Hwang Ui-jo in the first game of the World Cup, but he lost that position to Jo Gyu-sung. We saw also the forward position changed from 1 forward to 3 forwards in game 3 and 2 forwards in game 4. So that created a bit more room. And it was Son Heung-min who moved from left attacking midfield to become a left forward. And basically, it's remained that way. Jo Gyu-sung partnered with Son Heung-min in the 4-4-2 formation that they have been using. When those two are not there, it's the versatile Lee Jung-se and Hwang Hee-chang who have stepped in to assume the position. So there we have it. And that is it, our look at the players. We have a list here now, so we will go through that list in part 2. And let's finish with some closing thoughts. So actually, more than I thought, I've definitely seen in other teams regular players who have been kind of dumped for the last 4 to 6 games, and we see that with a few players in South Korea, again, more than I thought, and then some new players coming in. So once again, we're not dead sure if those players have been are off the team. In some cases, that would be a real surprise because they were regular players before, or whether they're just making room to try out some new players. So maybe the November games will shed some light on that. Otherwise, in a lot of positions, South Korea's squad looks fairly stable, and we see the same players at the World Cup. So it won't look that different from their World Cup squad. Let's do a quick preview of part 2. So again, probably late December or early January, the rosters will come out, and we'll compare that roster to what we've compiled here. And we'll note any notable non-selections, so that would be players at the likely or definite level here that don't make the squad. Any surprise inclusions, so that would be possible or unlikely players. Maybe we have more players in our files, but we're not focusing on them that much. So if any of those are kind of brought in from the cold, or some of the possible but unlikely players we mentioned here, we'll point that out. And any new players, there's always a couple of players in good form just before the Cup that seem to be brought to the Cup. So we'll talk about those in part 2. We'll also do an update on injuries. So the only one I can think of here is the third string goalkeeper with the broken foot, whether he'll come back or whether the player they brought in to replace him will end up being the third string keeper. That and any more recent injuries closer to the Cup we will talk about. Okay, and that brings us to the end of part 1, and we hope you join us for part 2. We originally planned to tag on our past, present and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naver Abidjan and Pixabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.